We will be doing the same steps for each of these inputs. So instead of repeating ourselves, let's create a new component for this input behavior and use it whenever necessary. So here under components directory, let's create a new component and let's call this one as input. By the way, we don't need this hello world view. You can just delete that one. And in this input, we will basically have this part, this template part. So just copying that one and adding into a template right here. Now we are going to need the properties of this value, this username, and the label text. And we also need this error message. And here we have this V model in the sign up page, which was associating this input's value with our state value of username. We are going to be passing those informations from this sign up page to this input component. And to do that, first we are going to have this script part. And in this object, we are going to define the properties of this component. So we have this props, and in this props, we will have, let's have the properties of, let's call this one as a label. And we define the type of this label, and this is going to be a string. And let's replace this username with the label we are going to receive in the props. And the next one is this part, this for and the ID. We are associating this label with this input by using this ID in the for attribute of the label. And we are doing the same thing for other input and labels. So this is going to be part of the props, and let's call this one as ID. So we will be passing an ID property, and we are going to use that ID value both here and here, and we bind that value with v bind colon for this ID, or we can go with the shorter syntax colon for, and same thing for this one. The ID will be the prop value we are passing. And for now, let's remove this V model. We are going to get to it. And lastly, we will be taking this text. This is error's username, but this will be reused for different inputs. So this part will be dynamic. And let's say the text of this span will be coming in the prop of help. So this input will have a prop help, and we will have the error message in that help. So saving this one, and let's use that input in this sign up page. So first thing we need to do is we will be importing that input, and that input is under components and input. And when we are using a component in another Vue component, and we do that right here in app, we have this components object, and we use that component, the imported component, in this components object. So here we will have components, and we will have input in this one. Now we can use input component right here, just commenting out this username part and adding input. And let's set the properties. So the first property is the ID, and the ID is username, and the next one is label, and the label is username with uppercase U, and the third property is help, and the help is going to be the value of error's username. So we can bind this property to error's username. So saving this one, by the way, this is going to break our tests, but let's not focus to the test yet. Basically, the tests are failing because we are not able to do changes in this input for the username. That's why this one is failing. We are not able to send the username to backend, and that assertion is failing. Now, if we check the Vue developer tools, here we have this app, here we have this sign up page, and we have this input component right here. Here we can see what are the properties set for this input element. Now let's handle this Vue model usage. In the HTML input, which is in lowercase input, we are able to use this Vue model, but for custom input, our custom input element, we are not able to use that one right away. We will do that eventually, but until that, let's see our options, how we can resolve this issue. Previously, we were able to assign functions for input events, like, for instance, here for this input, we were listening the input events or v-on input, and we were able to assign a method we define in this component. So we can go with that solution. So like this one, here in the sign up page, we can have a method. Let's add a method right here, and let's call this one as onChange username. So this username, this method will be called whenever we do any changes in that component. And let's say this is going to be taking the input event, and we are going to update the username by taking the event target value. So this was our initial implementation when we started building the sign up page, this form. Now we are repeating same thing for our custom input case. So we have this function, and let's pass this function as a property to this component. So let's say this will have a property onChange, and this onChange will be the function we have here. So binding this property to our method, and in the component, input component, let's use that property. So the property name is onChange, and the type of this property is function, and let's do it like this. All we need to do is we are going to listen the input events for this component, for this HTML input, and let's make sure this is going to be calling our function, onChange function, coming in the profs. So saving these changes. So this is fixing the issue, and if we open the developer tools, right here, this input element is having the property of this onChange, and in sign up page we have this username, and it is initially empty. And if we type anything here, it is not reflected to this username property, but if we type anything to others, right here we updated the email, and here we can see the username is actually having this value. So the custom input is able to call this onChange, and it is able to update this username. And we will get to this part. This is not immediately updated in the developer tools. By the way, this is only visible in developer tools if we, let's say, if the input is something like this, and let's send a network let's send a request. Here in the request we have this username is this one. So it is actually updated in the sign up page component, but this developer tools is not reflecting that change immediately. But for the others it is doing, and we will see how the vModel behavior will change this one. So this was one way to solve this problem. We are able to take the input value from this custom input and pass it to the state of this sign-up page. And another approach would be creating new events from this input and listening those events right here in the sign-up page for this custom input. And let's do that. So let's not take this onChange as a property anymore. So let's say we have our method right here, methods, and let's say this is onChange, just onChange define here, and it takes event, and let's call this onChange, this one, whenever we have this input events. So now the event is being handled in this component itself, but let's create a new event from this component. So we do that like this. This has $emit. This is for emitting events, and we set the event name. Let's call this one as custom-input. And the second parameter is the payload we want to pass with this event. And we can just pass the event target value. So this input element is handling this input events in it, in this onChange method, and it is emitting a new event, this one. And when our component emits events, we need to define those events in this component definitions emits property. This is an array, and in this array we have this custom input. And in sign up page, now we are not going to pass this onChange to this custom input, so removing that one. Instead of passing a property, we are going to listen events triggered in this component, and that event is this one, and we can listen the events like this, v-on and the event name, and for this case the event name is custom input, and we can call our function, this one. Again, we can use the same function onChange username. So here calling onChange username. By the way, we can go with the shorter syntax like this, @ for the events and the event name. Or we can go with camel case like this. So this input component will be emitting this event whenever it detects any changes in the regular HTML input in that component. Then in sign up page, we are listening for this custom input events, and we are handling those events in this onChange username right here. Now in this event, which is this one, custom input, we only have the payload. So let's call this one as just a value, and this value is this event target value, so the value in that HTML input element. So let's just assign this value to the username. So saving these changes. So this one is also passing, and let's apply our final solution. And just like using this v model for the regular input element, let's use same thing for our custom input, v model, and we are going to take the value to our username value in our state right here. So we are not going to use this onChange username function anymore. From signup page point of view, we will be just associating this username state variable with this input. So the changes in the input will be reflected to the username of this component. Now this vModel is doing two things at the same time. One is binding the value to the component, and the second one is listening the events being triggered from that component. So we are going to take the value in a property, and this is a default behavior for the vModel. So we take the value with model value property. This is string, and it is going to be listening for the events, and the event naming is like this: update colon model value. So this is going to be emitting this value, and we are going to use this model value in the inputs value attribute, and we can just set it like this. So the value will be model value, and again we are going to listen the changes, and this is going to be triggering this onChange, but this time we are going to emit this event, not the custom input, and the value will be again the event target value. So let's save all these changes. So this one is also working, and if we open the DevTools, and if we open the signup page, if we type anything here, as you can see with the vModel implementation, whenever we type anything to this input, here in the signup page, we are able to see the reflected changes. So this is how it is working. We can change our implementation to inline functions like this. So instead of having this onChange, we can directly call this part like this, copying this one and pasting right here. So the expression is set in the double quotes, so we need to use just single quote in it to make sure it is not breaking anything. So we are emitting this event, and we can access to the current input event with like this, not the event but $ event target value. So we don't need this method anymore, and saving this one, and this is also passing. We don't have a use case, but we could have multiple elements in this input, and we could use multiple vModels. And for such case, to associate the models with different inputs in this specific custom element, we can set arguments for this vModel. So like this one, vModel for, let's say, input -1. So there can be two inputs in this custom input, the input 1 and the input 2, and this one is looking for the input 1's value to be set to the username of this component, let's say. So in this case, the implementation would be something like this. So here, instead of this model value, we would be having this text input 1. So input 1, and this one would also be the property, And also right here we would be using this input one both in the value and the emit parts. So let's save these changes. So this one is also working. So if we would have multiple elements right here in this component, and if we would want to use the Vue model to take the values from those elements, then we could use this approach. So like this one, we would have Vue model input 1, we would have Vue model input 2, and it is for, let's say, for email, for instance. But we don't have that use case, so just undoing these parts and going with this Vue model and undoing the things I did right here in this input component. So saving all these changes once again to make sure nothing is broken. And all tests are passing, so we extracted this input as a separate component, and now we can use this one for these email, password, and password repeat cases too.